So ultimately, I think in terms of cash, the FP&A forecast is a planning tool where the treasury forecast is an execution tool.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Welcome to the Actualize Cash Forecasting podcast. I'm with my colleagues. This is Priscila Nagalli. I'm with Michelle Dudar and Brian Stitt. Today we're going to be talking about cash forecasting, which is interesting, right? I don't know of a treasury group that does not do cash forecasting, but yet almost all of the ones that I know do struggle with it. So especially now in the current economic environment, where forces are pulling in different directions, it's very important to get a better understanding of your cash. Most important, what is the duration of it and for how long you're gonna have it. So we're gonna talk about all those good stuff. So Michelle, what is common market practice for forecasting when it comes forecasting to mind?
Well, I think that there's two different types of forecasts that are generated in the corporation. We've got the very long-term, very high-level forecast that's created by the FP&A group, and that's used for setting budgets and board approval. And then we have the very detailed forecast in the treasury group, which is really being used on a daily basis to monitor cash in bank accounts. And as you mentioned, Priscilla, as the economy changes and particularly as the interest rates continue to rise, treasury groups are being tasked with using cash as efficiently as possible. And so having excess cash in bank accounts is expensive and not wanted. So I feel like the treasury forecasting process is becoming more and more critical as the interest rates go higher and higher.
Yeah. So also sometimes there is that disconnect, right, between FP&A and treasury. I think that happens with several companies, and how they connect at the end, or how do they overlap? What are your thoughts there, Michelle?
Well, as I mentioned, the FP&A and treasury forecasts serve very different purposes, and they have very different audiences, and because of that, they have very different approaches in terms of their timing, what they focus on, and what's considered a material amount. The FP&A, that forecast is very much a forward view. It's done at a very high level and for a longer term, typically, the budget cycle plus a number of years. It's created in months and years, and it's often done just at a corporate level. There is no concern given to which division or region is generating cash or spending cash. It all just nets out on the bottom line. Because the FP&A forecast is used to set the budget, this is where lots of the what-if analysis is done. Lots of the scenarios are run. This is where stretch goals are done. Quite often, companies are targeting earnings per share. And so the FP&A forecast is where we use different line items are being manipulated to see what has to happen or what needs to happen in the organization in order to get to the earnings share or the earnings per share number. The forecasts are typically done in very big round numbers, quite often in millions. FP&A forecast is often used as the budget that's approved by the board of directors. And in the event of a public company, those numbers are communicated to the street and to the investors. So a very, very different audience when you think about the treasury. They have very detailed forecasts. They're looking at yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Their forecasts tend to be very good for the next month or couple of months, but for the very short term. And then they get to be more general as time goes on. It's important to the treasury group that they know exactly where cash is located globally. And so they create forecasts for regions, by cash pools, and even in some instances by individual bank accounts. They look at those and they reconcile what happened yesterday, and then they determine they're going to put into their forecast to fine-tune what's going to happen today and tomorrow. The materiality threshold in treasury is much lower. A large corporation may have a threshold of $1 million a day. And as a result, things like daily cash swings from things like check clearings, unexpected receipts, or margin calls are significant and important to the Treasury group. And they need to be sorted out, what happened, why, and what they're going to do with the variance on a go-forward basis. Whereas the FP&A forecast this would just be all blurred together and smoothed out over the course of the month. The thing that's interesting though, Priscilla, is the FP&A and Treasury forecast, while they're very different, the FP&A forecast often forms the base of the Treasury forecast. And then the Treasury actuals update the FP&A forecast and then the budget expectations. So ultimately, I think in terms of cash, the FP&A forecast is a planning tool where the Treasury forecast is an execution tool.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle, Michelle. Thank you. And from what are the challenges, right? Like I think you described really well the purposes and the uses and what we are seeing, but what are the challenges that we see across our client base? And obviously you had a great career in Treasury too. If you don't mind sharing.
Sure, I think Treasury has a couple of big challenges. It's a challenge with collecting information from different sources and then getting it into a format that it can use. So as I just mentioned, Treasury needs a way to take the information from that high-level, broad stroke FP&A forecast and build it into a detailed daily Treasury forecast. And in some cases, that's very easy. Line items like debt and interest payments we know what day it's going to happen. We know what bank account it's going to get paid out of. And so it's very easy to have the line item from FP&A translate nicely over to the Treasury forecast. Other line items like CapEx or vendor payments don't translate as easily. There'll be one number in the FP&A forecast, but to Treasury, it's important to know what the shape of that spending is and what bank accounts it's going to impact so that Treasury can fund them as required. On a more granular basis, Treasury needs also a way to gather information from the business units and the regions and use that information to populate its forecast. And in decentralized organizations, it has its own challenges. You have different teams are reporting different forecast categories, different time horizons. They may even have different goals. How they prepare their forecast and send it into the Treasury group may be different for each of the regions. And then there's the intercompany transactions that happen that need to be somehow sorted out at the Treasury level so that we're not double counting or missing any of the transactions. And even in a centralized organizations, each department or business unit has different templates or line items. It becomes a challenge as we try to get all of those information sources into the Treasury forecast in a timely basis and like I said, without duplicating effort. I think the weirdest thing about the forecast is Treasury, the holder of the purse, is often the last to know of material transactions. And so while many organizations are doing, or many parts of the organization are doing significant dollar transactions, they don't necessarily understand or appreciate the Treasury process or timelines. And as I said, now that the cost of borrowing is increasing and Treasury is being tasked with using cash efficiently, it's very important to know when a company should be borrowing or investing its cash. Some banks require 2 days notice and documentation to get a borrowing. Without that information, the borrowing becomes even more expensive. And even if cash is received without notice, it's not really a nice problem to have because Treasury is either looking for some way to pay down that debt, which requires, again, notice, or in some instances, the most expensive debt that the organization has can't even be repaid easily. So in the event that cash does or doesn't move, Treasury needs to figure out how long it's going to be in that situation and what to do about it.
So information tends to be, if I hear right, the information tends to be the challenge and communication and coordination. One thing that I think obviously we raised a lot of questions there and challenges, and our work as consultants, right? Like how do we address that? Maybe Brian, if you don't mind helping the audience shed some light on how do you improve that situation? How do you address those challenges that we see with our clients?
I mean, a lot of the path to improving the cash forecasting, lies in questioning the status quo. If the process that you have today, why is it that you're really that you're kind of doing what you're doing, or does your process align with the goals of the forecasting that the Treasury is tasked with? How are you leveraging technology? What are you doing to analyze the forecast to improve it, and how have standardized the process? So from a data perspective, I think a good way to improve the forecast is to confirm that the presentation of your forecast is aligning with the intent. If we see a lot of cases where teams are spending a lot of time producing reporting at very detailed levels that management isn't even looking to. So it's good to ask the question, from an improvement and a time perspective. Is there any reporting, or are there any tasks that you're performing related to forecasting that that can be phased out? I think the key too is in organizing the data, making sure that that you're really answering those key questions of do you, depending on your business, do you have the the cash available to invest in some sort of kind of term investment over the next 60 days? Do you have the cash needed to to make a scheduled debt pay down? And that really, I think, starts with kind of organizing the data and understanding the goals. The next piece is really kind of understanding that technology is your friend, and to analyze the available sources of how you get the data into your forecast, and identify if there are better ways to obtain the data. Often the ERPs are able to provide feeds of AP and AR information into a treasury management system, and treasury management systems have tools embedded within them to help develop the forecast. So where from a forecast quality perspective, where there are gaps in information, treasury can be empowered to help produce that forecast and fill in some of those gaps. One of the ways that team members at treasury can use or can help fill in some of the gaps of forecasting is where there is missing information, to use actuals or historical information to help determine the forecast. So depending on your industry, whether generally the industry is more mature or less mature, there may be elements of your forecast that that do behave pretty consistently period over period. If it's something like payroll or rent that are more stable over time. So kind of identifying what parts of your forecast can behave in a manner consistent with historical activity, or historical activity plus or minus a certain percent. That can really help improve the accuracy as well. Like I mentioned, a TMS usually has a tool that can help support that versus trying to accomplish that manually. From an ERP perspective, I mentioned that you can take in AP and AR information as part of your forecast, and oftentimes that information may be good for a few weeks to 60 days, kind of on the long end, and really kind of understanding what information you have available in your ERP, and how good that is, and out into what time horizon. That can really help answer the question of whether an integration or an interface into your forecast is something that that would improve the positioning. Because especially from a short term, having real expectations of payment runs can be really useful in determining how close to your cash buffer you'll be getting. And then I think another piece for technology as well is just overall thinking about how can you reevaluate or eliminate manual work. Think about the time that you're spending either entering or manipulating data manually. Do you still need to do this? Is there a more automated way? If you are gathering information from multiple teams, is there a more automated way people can submit information, or perform some self-service into loading those into systems? Because I see a lot of teams as well spending a good portion of their process reaching out to regional teams, gathering templates, compiling them, and then loading into a system. Whereas there's a lot of technology solutions that can help resolve that as well.
Yeah, and I would even add to that, what I've seen in the marketplace is that historically the whole forecasting process is like gathering data from a number of different places, right? So, but mature companies that have been in business and established, and history of those actual cash flows should be a good indication. Also, any amortization forecasted on the debt and things like that. So I think there are ways for Treasury to become less dependent and a bit more self-sufficient, but on a shorter period of time, right? So there is, I think I'm still advocating that Treasury and FP&A should talk, even though sometimes they don't. But I think at the end of the day, Treasury has a very good idea on how cash moves for the most part. Through analysis, become a bit more self-sufficient than having to go to so many different places to gather data. And we've successfully seen this working for a number of companies when they're looking more at the latest technologies, looking at AI, looking at just looking at history and projecting to the future, that having even a better accuracy than a lot of times. So also, I mean, since I have you on, what would be the methodologies, right, to adopt? I think we talked about technology. We talked about variance analysis, which is again like so important, but not everybody does it properly. What is the right methodology and how they can enhance what they're currently doing, or even if they're looking to scratch and start over? If you can provide some guidelines on the methodology, please.
Sure. Yeah, I think whether a team is just getting started or looking to improve, revamp an existing process, overall we recommend a methodology that begins with a forecast diagnostic that then feeds into building a roadmap. And kind of what we're meaning there is the diagnostic is basically an exploration and an assessment of your current state, where we find the forecasting process can be complex and involves quite a few different teams. And so prior to making any changes to that process, it's really important to build a shared understanding across the organization of what is happening today and what are the goals of the forecast analysis. And to go a bit deeper into the kind of the diagnostic, this is where we clearly we want to get a good picture of the current state. One of the first steps there would be to kind of come up with a visual mapping of actuals and forecast data, where the data is coming from and who owns that information. Why that's important is it really serves as a starting point to that you can use to amend if you identify an opportunity to for a methodology change. It kind of puts all in one place how much of your forecast is coming is being entered or gathered manually, how much is coming systematically, and it helps kind of identify are there differences from department to department, region to region. So it's kind of the first platform. The next mapping would be kind of creating a visual of an understanding across the team, the process of gathering actuals, forecast information, and the variance analysis. Once we kind of have those two pieces together, we take that as part of that diagnostic to understand how are you getting the data, especially where are the handoffs in the process, and how long does it take? Because one of the kind of key tripping points that we see with teams is they might have kind of a robust forecast process, but if a cash forecast takes half a month to get together, that really makes it tough to action real time in a meaningful way. So we really try to build a kind of a shared vision or understanding of what's happening today. And then the next piece in the diagnostic is to make an assessment of where you would stand at the current day with a scorecard. And that's basically identifying across the actuals, the forecasting, variance analysis, what are the opportunities for improvement in a way where you can define what not just what needs fixing, but what kind of how you can get there as well. And so like some examples I think we talked about in the challenges a bit, and for actual data, do you have the visibility that you need to support an effective variance analysis? There's a lot of cases where teams may be producing a forecast across the organization, but they either may spend a huge amount of time gathering actual information from bank portals, or they may be missing key components. On the forecasting side, they mostly from a methodology perspective are all regions using the same approach? Are they taking the the same goals as part of the forecast? What we see a lot of times as well is whether it's from from acquisitions or from different interdepartmental goals, that the the level of detail, the time horizon, the format of forecast across teams differ, and then it falls on treasury to try to consolidate and normalize those. And then kind of next, just thinking about the variance analysis, one of the biggest opportunities that we see there is, is there an automated method to perform variance analysis? Meaning that is there kind of a clear tie between the actual data and the corresponding forecast? And so really when we try to pull together this forecast diagnostic, it's a picture of what's happening today, but also kind of that starting point of, here's what you can do next, and some of the actions that you can take to improve as well. And as you can imagine, peeling back the onion of the current process can kind of uncover more than you expected when you first start off in that journey. And so it's really helpful to kind of have a more kind of a formalized view of across the team and across the actuals and forecast process where you can grow. But I think a big question would be what to do with that information. So the second phase of the methodology is the forecast roadmap. So how do you take that assessment and actually realize the improvement? And that kind of realization of the improvement, it really begins with defining, well, where do you want to go next? So we have a clear vision of the current state. So you would want to map out how the process will change. So by creating a visual there, you can kind of compare to the current state and help build that understanding of what's changing internally across the team. And that can be really important to help folks visualize if there is a change in in ownership for a process, changes in handoffs, where there's, especially when interdepartmental communication is involved, there's a lot of opportunity for for breakdown. So it's really important to highlight what's going to differ from a process side, and really the same as well from the data side. One of the bigger pieces from where we want to map out the kind of how data sourcing will change will be if there is any additional technology you'll be leveraging, any new integrations into your treasury management system or otherwise, because then it really helps identify, are there resources outside of the treasury team that are needed to accomplish this? Then really once we have kind of the ideal future state measured, kind of an important step as well would be to define, well, how are we going to measure success? Basically in defining the KPIs. We need to know what will be the goals of the process, and some examples there would be as part of the forecast rationalization, delivering an updated 13-week forecast, say within 5 days, targeting a goal that the forecast is 75% automated, reaching a variance within an acceptable range. Again, that really depends on the industry and the maturity of the company, or and their goal could be to reduce the idle cash or the cash buffer by X amount. Having a key set of goals and methods to measure it really helps kind of drive the energy behind the forecast process as well.
Thank you, Brian. This gives us a good view on like what would be the methodology. Michelle, do you have any other points, like when people think about, I'm going to optimize what I'm doing now and this is how I'm going to start?
I do have a couple of quick ideas. I mean, I do think that there is some low-hanging fruit when we think about making the treasury forecasting process simpler. I think first, if we can figure out a way to standardize methodology by the use of templates and line items, the way that different business units send in their forecast, I think that would go a long way. As Brian mentioned, where we can automate what we can, that's a huge time saver. And the great thing about technology is you can build in so many checks and balances. So it really will reduce the number of errors that are in the forecast. As you mentioned, Priscilla, using historical data to forecast the future, there's lots of technology out there that will do that to help us. But I really think to have a really good forecast, it's the work of a village. And the very first thing that you need to do is understand the gaps between what you have and what you like. And I think when we look back at what Brian was talking about, we figure out, clearly define what the current state is, who owns what, who has what, when are we getting it, how are we getting it. We can start with a scorecard, and those scores will probably be relatively low. And then we build the roadmap that's going to help us figure out how it is that we're going to get to the forecast that we would ultimately like. And the work that we've done in terms of standardizing templates and processes probably is going to come in very handy here, because we've got a bunch of that work done up front, and now it can just be automated and used very quickly. Once we have the roadmap, we can start working our way down it, but we can start to look at the KPIs and see that the effort that we're putting into it is being reflected in the accuracy of the forecast. And we'll see that there are less variances. We're having better communication with the business groups. We have people giving us information when we want to. And maybe the divide between the FP&A forecast being a planning tool and the cash forecast being an execution tool, maybe it's not quite a wide divide anymore.
Yeah, I think the era of automation is here, and we should benefit from that, right? Ideally, it would not be a process that we are constantly waiting on someone else. We're just using the data that is available. We are connecting, and people are making things available and more streamlined. There's so many ways of collaborating, and I think we just need to optimize that and build the right processes to make it faster and more accurate as well. But thank you guys so much. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Brian. And that's our end of our cash forecasting podcast. For more information about Actualize, please do reach out.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.